Well, good morning, and welcome back to our pilgrimage together through this summer of 2014. Today marks day 7 here at the Institute for Priestly Formation, as well as on this Sunday, we celebrate in the Diocese of Houma-Thibodaux the Ascension of the Lord. Today at IPF, the seminarians are in their second full day of their 8-day silent retreat, and great things happening in their lives, and I would ask that you continue to pray for the men. Tonight at the retreat conference, we'll offer lots of encouragements, most of that centered around the importance of trusting God's generosity, especially if any of the men are struggling in silence. And I think that the struggle with silence is certainly not something that just the seminarians struggle with, but I think across the board, I think our culture and perhaps many of us struggle with silence also. And you might say, if you were at IPF, probably the same struggles that the men may be going through would be the same experiences that the Lord might be calling you through. And that is to grow comfortable with solitude and to grow in comfort in silence. I think our culture struggles with silence. And if you look at the blog, there's a great quote from Pope Benedict XVI where he says, and I quote, that many of us want to fill every moment with music images out of fear of feeling empty. I'll stop there with the quote, and I think that the Holy Father has his pulse on the pulse of the culture, that I think a lot of us do desire to kind of fill up our world with lots of distractions, whether it's our phones themselves, the smartphones, or other types of gadgets or music, or just a myriad of other type of communication. Like we are constantly distracted, and some of us are compulsively grasping at those things during our quote-unquote free moments, and it's almost like we don't know how to live without them. Going back to the quote, he says, "This trend has always existed, especially among the young and in more developed urban context, but today it has reached a level so as such to give rise to talk about anthropological mutation. Some people are no longer able to remain for long periods in silence and solitude." That's a big word there. Let's unpack that together. What does anthropological mean? It means the study of what it means to be human, or what does it mean to be human, or just the essence of humanity. So when the Holy Father is talking about our inability to be silent is giving rise to an anthropological mutation, what he's saying is that when we forget how to remain recollected, when we forget how to be quiet, when we forget how to be alone with ourselves or alone with God, we forget what it means to be human. For if you and I were made in the image and likeness of God, then you and I are most human when we are in relationship with God. And that experience is often facilitated in solitude or in quiet. St. Augustine knew this, and as he talks beautifully about his conversion, he talks about the fact that St. Augustine himself was a man who lived in the world. He was a man of the culture. He was a man swept about by all the things that were around him, and he was living just like everybody else was living. And then his Confessions, he has this beautiful quote about how God was within him and he was living without. God was on the inside. God was in the quiet of his heart. God was there. And Augustine was not living within. He was not living attentive to his interior life. He was, quote unquote, without or on the out. God was within him. And I just think that that's such a part of our lives, isn't it? That we're so trained almost by the culture to always grab for something to take our attention off of just being quiet. I'm probably just as guilty as that as anybody, and many of you see me walking fast or glued to my computer, or certainly as glued to my smartphone as anybody is. And I remember losing my phone on a plane one day. I missed it, left it on a connecting flight, and so it was with me on my first flight, and I left it there on accident. And so the entire second flight, I didn't have it, and I didn't have anything. I remember feeling so awkward and lost without something in my hand, something to grab my attention, but at the same time, so utterly free and grateful that, wow, all I had to do was be with people or just pay attention to God within. And it reminded me that I think a lot of us can struggle with silence and just being alone with our thoughts. Sometimes we'll be afraid of silence because we don't know what we're going to find, or we do know what our perception of ourselves is, and we don't want to go within. Some of us perhaps might struggle with silence because, like, when we are quiet, we just don't hear God, and we want to hear God, and just the disappointment or the grief of feeling abandoned by God in our spiritual lives can be a little barrier for us living within or being silent. So if you were at IPF, I think you and I would probably be going through the same thing the men are, and that is in the silence, wrestling with how comfortable we are there. And so my encouragement to us today is to be not afraid. That God who calls us to communion. And God calls us into a deeper relationship with Him. And that relationship is often either facilitated or certainly deepened when you and I have the courage to slow down and to commit to some time of silence each day. So for your prayer today, I would encourage you to pray with two scripture passages. The first is Psalm 131, and the second is Jeremiah 29:11-14. Both of those are on the blog, and I want to encourage you to ask yourself if you can ask the Lord for help. Ask the Lord to settle your heart, to help you grow comfortable with the silence. Let's keep praying for each other. Let's trust that God's pursuing us, and that the God that we long for can often be found in the silence. God bless you.